Recording. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Welcome again to another OZeWAI Ask the Professionals event. This one on accessible ICT procurement, and we've got some very exciting panelists and some news even from OZeWAI to share today. I'm going to start with an acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm meeting, and pay respects to the elders of the Ngunnawal Nation, both past and present, here in Canberra. And I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander peoples in attendance today. And it would be great if you're in the chat, if you could just introduce yourself, maybe your role, where you're from, and also who do you pay your respects to today. And then I'm going to go do a little bit of intro about OZeWAI, and then go around and introduce our panelists. All right. I'm Bree Norton. I'm co-chair of OZeWAI. We've been running these events now for almost a year. It'll be a year in August. So a couple of really great ones coming up in June and July that we'll be promoting soon. So register, subscribe to get our mailing list. That's free. If you do want to get involved in OZeWAI, you can join as a member. This helps us with some of the projects that we work on, and we do have some exciting news on that front around procurement today. We used to be an annual conference. We are now a career professionalisation, where we have this membership approach and ask the professional events on topics that are relevant for accessibility professionals, and basically career pathways in that space. So we bring in those that are doing some wonderful things in the accessibility world in their organisations. So I'm going to start with Juanita. If you could please introduce yourself first, and then we'll go to Andrew Norman and then Callum.
So my name is Juanita George. I am the head of accessibility at Navy Federal Credit Union. And I also represent Navy Federal on the W3C and the accessibility guidelines and ARIA working groups. I also serve on the leadership team at ISOC, the ISOC's accessibility special interest group, as an outreach person, and then I've been with Navy Federal for 4 years. I try to stay active in the community, and accessibility is foundational to what we do as a credit union that serves its members, and it's important to me. Just because it's really my passion to ensure that the internet is free, fair, and available to everybody. It just is something that is so fundamental to people's lives and is a fundamental human right.
Excellent. Thanks, Juanita. So great to have you here. And I really appreciate that my co-chair Amanda is here on the call. So if you do have a question, I'm sure she'll put some answers in the chat as well as we go. Andrew, if you'd like to do an intro, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Andrew Norman. I'm the Web Accessibility Lead at the University of Melbourne. I'm coming to you today from Wurundjeri land. My role at the university basically involves providing advice to students and staff who have disabilities about assistive tech and issues which they come across. I think during my time there, I've employed over 50 students with disabilities to help not only test websites, but to give me advice and guidance as to the sort of roadblocks that they encounter in terms of their day-to-day activities. I also do training for various teams around the uni. I help staff when they're creating learning and teaching content, marketing and communications when they're creating templates, and spend a lot of time doing procurement. So, which I think for probably a lot of us is going to be becoming more and more of our sort of bread and butter. I suppose for me, the reason why accessibility is so interesting is it's just one of those, it just makes sense type of things. And I think being in IT, a lot of us are in IT, and this is something which I say to the various other people in IT, is I think a lot of people are sympathetic to people who have a disability or want access to technology, who have a disability, but at a practical level, how much can we really help people, in their day-to-day needs in terms of washing, getting from A to B, the sort of things that a carer might do. probably we can't do that a lot of the time. But in relation to IT, where people really do want help and they often can't get help from people who are, the close people around them, that's our special subject, and so
Yeah.
we understand it, and we can provide very practical advice to people. So that's something which I find very inspiring about this space.
That's great. It's great to have you, Andrew, and it's wonderful to have you on our subcommittee too, where we're going to share some resources today for those that are joining us. So Callum, please, would you like to do an intro for us? New Zealand's been doing some pretty cool things.
Yeah, hey, I'm Callum McMenamin. I work as a web standards consultant in the web standards team, and we work under the Government Chief Digital Officer. So we've got a mandate to set the accessibility standards for many New Zealand government agencies. So we write those standards and maintain them. And we also write guidance to help New Zealand government agencies to meet those standards. We also run fortnightly clinics to help people meet the standards and understand them. And we're also embarking on a program to automatically audit every single New Zealand government website that is public facing. So that's been an interesting pilot program we've had running over the past year or so. Yeah, so that's pretty much what I'm doing in terms of work. I myself, I'm visually impaired, so that's I've got a somewhat selfish motivation for caring about accessibility because it impacts me personally. I spend a lot of time advocating for improvements in physical accessibility, mainly around roads, crossing roads and things like that in cities. And I also care a lot about tech. So that's why I work in this role. Thank you.
Excellent. And we're going to hear a little bit more about your resource as well when we get to that today. But we might just start with a little bit more about Juanita, you've been sharing some ideas around what's happening in your organisation with procurement, and you've been building out that you've got a little bit of a team there. How does that work for you? How do you build accessibility processes into building the products and services in your organisation?
Several different programs. We have a dev coaching program, which we're launching this year, which will kind of ensure that development teams have the right culture and right practices to bake accessibility in. We have accessibility engineers as well. We have our vendor monitoring program, which we'll talk, I'll probably say a few more words about that today. Yeah. And we also have a training and awareness program and a number of different, like a non-innovation initiative and a couple of other different smaller pieces. Smaller components of our program that we're building out still. So, really trying to go more comprehensive, really trying to put the supports in for every phase of the software development lifecycle and ensuring that vendors uphold the same standards for accessibility that we use internally.
Excellent. And Andrew, we've got the CAUDIT standards that have been developed recently in Australia. Do you want to share a little bit about that and how that can support organisations?
Yeah, so I think it was last year. Sort of time flies past, but there was an initiative from ADSET and there's somebody else involved in that, but it was mainly ADSET, who are the Australian Andrew Daniel would know the clearinghouse on education and training, who do a lot of really good work. They have some mailing lists, they have resources online about accessible technology. So they do some fantastic work in education, but they wanted to pull together some resources in relation to accessible procurement, particularly focused on the higher education space. And so they engaged Intopia to help work on those. And so we produced a whole lot of documentation of useful resources for people, sample RFP questions, explanations of what's a VPAT and an accessibility conformance report, how to embed accessibility into the organisation, how to assess responses, how to put questions into contracts with vendors, and so that's a very useful some very useful information in there for people if they're interested.
And have you used it in the Uni of Melbourne currently? Do you know
I
that
use
it's
it
being
all.
used? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, pretty much all of that, because I tried to do it based on I'm always trying to do stuff based on what I do, and so it's not like I'm preaching something that I'm not
Yeah.
not doing. But I sometimes use it as a reference point for looking at gaps. So some of the stuff which was good doing that was that I think the Entopia said some good things around governance, and so trying to see, okay, what are we still missing from those pieces in the governance puzzle. But I certainly use the questions all the time. There's a really good set of, because I probably, like a lot of people, you've maybe got 8 or 10 questions which you put in a standard RFP, but then it's sometimes based on the vendor responses, you want to probe a little bit more deeply into their the vendor's accessibility capacity. And so having a list of sort of 30 questions ready to go is fantastic, just to go, okay, I want to ask them a little bit more about X, and just to have the wording there.
No, that's great. And I think I'm just going to put a link in the chat to the New Zealand government advice that you shared with us, Callum, a while back. Do you kind of share links that resource quite often now? Is it something that people are really jumping into?
Yeah, I seem to be sending that link to people at least once a week. One of the main motivations for writing that guidance was it's less work for me once I've written it down. We can just refer people to it. We had a very interesting situation recently where I referred a government agency to this guidance when they were looking to implement or purchase a web system. So they were coming to me for procurement advice. And the main thing I pointed them to was that they really must ask for solid evidence that they have audited their product against WCAG. So they asked the vendor that question, and then the vendor independently came to me and said, they've asked for an accessibility conformance report. What is this, Callum? And so then I taught them about what that means and how they can answer that question. So I got to see sort of both sides of the situation there, which was quite funny. But I think what it illustrates potentially was that these vendors simply were not being asked for actual evidence of conformance to WCAG. It was probably one of the first times they were asked. So yeah, that's something that I've learned recently.
And so how can organizations ensure, and especially accessibility specialists in an organization, how can they ensure their procurement areas and their business areas do ask? What kind of things? I'll open that to Juanita, do you want to go first?
Definitely. So you'll want to start right at the source, and you'll want to actually form relationships with folks in procurement to make sure that you have those questions in the RFP, and then also make sure that you're sort of asking those prying questions and such, and ensuring that you're actually selecting vendors who are advising business teams and such to select vendors who have the best responses, also seem more likely to form actual working relationships with the accessibility team, and who have, of course, the most accessible things that you could find. I really encourage folks to just go out and test their vendors, do smoke testing. Don't take an ACR at face value, because vendors could be basing it off of a lot of different things, even if they know what an accessibility audit is. Maybe the audit's old. Maybe they didn't engage somebody who's knowledgeable in accessibility testing. And so that's why it's always important to take the ACR as one input out of many different inputs and get involved as early as possible. And of course, make sure you help your procurement teams assess whether or not the vendor meets the definition of the scope of your program. So if
Yeah.
you're doing only public facing or internal facing things as well, make sure that they understand that, make sure that you have template contract language that would go for the type of contract that you're working with, and ensure that gets in to that the accessibility language, just make it into the contract. So a lot of steps there. And if you miss a few vendors, there's always a renewal process and such as well, where you can get a second bite at the apple.
Yeah, put that kind of recheck in when you come up for renewal. Make sure it's there, especially if you are you're having a legacy system already. Andrew, have you found that as well? And I know we've got a few questions here that I'm jumping through at the moment, and also adding some extra ones. But if you do have questions in the participants, please put it in the chat. We'll bring those questions to our panelists. But yeah, Andrew, what do you think the that kind of process?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Juanita's saying there, is that you're using really that ACR as a starting point, but beyond that, you really want to find out a little bit more about the vendor's accessibility capacity, you know. And so I will ask them, what testing tools are you using? You know, because that's not market sensitive stuff for them to be able to just say, well, you know, just what tools are, you know, we're familiar with the tools, and you can just see whether they've got a credible answer to that, because people who are testing, they will come back straight away and just say, yep, we're using this, this, and this. But people who are fudging it a bit will say, we respect everybody in the world, you know, sort of thing. So definitely looking for those, more concrete steps. And even though I think even on that, in relation to, you know, I had one come up this week where the vendor said that they're not, you know, accessibility compliant. And so instead of maybe just asking the question of, do you have a roadmap, which is very vague, you know, we would say, well, can you commit to a time frame in which you're going to do complete an accessibility conformance report? Because we know that, like, this is a staged process. If you don't have the audit, you can't fix the problem. So sometimes you can maybe break up some of those steps for vendors, and also I've always say to vendors, you know, we want to work in partnership with people. We're asking you the same questions as we ask our teams internally, and what we ask other vendors. We're not singling you out.
It's interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure if Greg Alchin's on the call, but there's tests happening in the New South Wales government where they're developing products for other parts of the New South Wales government, and they're being asked to do an ACR as well. So you know, it's starting to actually build up in Australia an understanding of what a accessibility performance report is and how to use it. So we need more of that information out there. So Callum, the guidance that you put together, what is there? How did you go about that to kind of, you know, I know you said it was stuff that people were asking you anyway, but did you kind of talk to vendors? Did you talk to suppliers as well?
We mainly spoke to multiple different government agencies. So we got the accessibility team from our Ministry of Social Development. They've got an accessibility team of, I think, 9 people. We also worked with the all of government procurement team in the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. And we also worked with procurement specialists in our tax department. So we had consultation through a wide range of agencies, and we basically just pulled together every single idea that we could, and just formalized it into the guidance that is pasted into the chat. And I think one of the biggest things I learned in that process was procurement starts earlier than I thought, and is a much it extends beyond the process of just buying something. So in terms of the earliness of it, one of the key points we mention is actually just consulting with the future users of the product. Speak to them. Check if you've got a disabled employee network in your organization. They'll often have a lot of advice around pain points in these systems that they interact with. So yeah, that's something I learned.
Yeah, we've been talking about this in OZeWAI as well, and this understanding for accessibility professionals who, maybe came in and did technical audits. How do they help their organizations earlier in that kind of a process when they're doing user research? That they're actually getting asked to do that as well. And I think procurement's another aspect of that. So it's starting to kind of see an accessibility specialist being, pulled into all these different areas. Have you noticed that as well, that it's not just about doing your audits anymore now, so you're getting asked earlier?
Yeah, it's sort of interesting with audits. I sort of feel many of the audits I see, the issues never really get fully resolved. Again, it's that thing where if it's not addressed in the early stages of a product, often that product will never fully comply. And that's one of the main points that we put into that guidance. So it's really just stressing early intervention, really making sure that the developers involved in a project actually understand accessibility, making sure the designers understand it, all super important. And we're slowly starting to see that over time.
Yeah. I think that's where I've got a question here about where have you seen product accessibility done well? But I think if you see that process change in it and people are asking earlier, is that where you see it? I don't know, Callum, did you want to? Have you? Is that where you're seeing it done well, or is it not seen yet? Still got a bit of work.
Yeah, we're seeing some process change. So, for instance, I'm aware of one development team in a government agency that has now standardized automated accessibility testing throughout all of their development. They've integrated automated tests into the designer's toolkit with Figma. Their continuous integration and deployment system has Axe Core constantly testing every single change and things like that. So it's really integrating those really low cost tests into it. Obviously, automated tests are not everything.
Yeah.
However, it is really great to be able to run an automated test on a page and it doesn't get 30,000 issues. It gets 0. That whittles down the numbers a bit. So that's one of the biggest areas we're seeing process change in New Zealand government is in automated tests.
What about you, Juanita? Have you seen any change? Like where you been? These processes change. Is it getting better in the products that you see, or have you seen some good products? I mean, I don't know if we want to call some of them out, but what do you see as the process that they're doing that makes them better?
Related to anything internally, but I do really like this, like the strides Apple and Google are taking, and the approach that they're taking really as becoming sort of a little bit of thought leaders. Doesn't mean they're perfect, doesn't mean all their internal things are accessible, but at least they're showing a desire to sort of innovate in this area and really produce tools that kind of help everybody. Google Read Mode is excellent. There's just it doesn't have to be perfect for it to be useful. So, I really do like the fact that they're trying to think outside of the box there and create useful tools. Then, in terms of, I guess, getting towards, whether it's getting better, I do see more vendors willing to work with you, especially, and really to build that relationship, you have to show that your sort of willingness to help them get to 100% compliance. And vendors, as long as you have solutions that are applicable to them that they can use and can kind of help them get there, our team works with them. So we have our engineers work with our vendors, and that's proven to be a very effective method to kind of get vendors to fix things, is to be that source of expertise. So I would say that, try to help your vendor get to where they want to be, because a lot of vendors are asking for this. If you talk to a lot of folks as accessibility teams out there, as in this industry, there are a lot of internal teams that are just asking clients to say, hey, bring these issues up because this is what we do and we want to do the right thing. And so if you talk to those folks, if you bring them along and you sort of give them a roadmap to get there, and work out some reasonable timelines, it is very possible. And I think the situation is just getting better, and it's really positive. It's not perfect yet. it's got a long way from being perfect, but it's good to see the attitude sort of changing.
No, it's great. And I think, some of them are kind of working out, well, it's good business sense too, right? We'll share that resource in a moment too, which might encourage them a little bit more. But with that kind of thinking of accessibility specialists in vendors, are you finding that there's more of those teams in vendors? You kind of mentioned that. Andrew, I don't know if you've noticed that as well, that there's actually more accessibility teams that, you can reach out to when you're actually in the procurement process. Juanita, so I'll finish with you first, and then we'll go to Andrew.
A lot of big companies have them now. Even smaller companies are starting to realize the importance of having folks that specialize in accessibility. And I just want to say that there's more than one kind of accessibility professional. So if you're creating your own team, have folks with different kinds of talents. But vendor teams, it's becoming more and more common for them at least to have some accessibility engineers or an internal audit capacity, or at least be working with some of the big names in that space.
No, that's a good point. What about you, Andrew? Have you noticed that at all, that the vendors are building their teams?
I think sometimes there's a bit of a gap between the salespeople here in Australia and the vendors if they're in the US, and so and sometimes that can be surprising. So even we had an issue with Okta with a two-factor authentication, and we know that that's difficult to do. And so I wrote an audit report and shared it with them. The people in Australia said, they never listen to us in Australia, but so I sent them through my report and a user testing video, and they said, yeah, we're picking up all of this stuff, and they've already rolled it out worldwide across their product. And the people in Australia were really shocked because they they never normally listen to us when we give them feedback. But I think what they're really craving is enough detail to be able to fix the problem. So if you can, and I've had that same thing, I'll actually get a very good response from those accessibility help links. So even Zoom, I think there was a problem with that at one stage with keyboard focus, and sent them some feedback on that, and some error messaging, using the Microsoft stuff, and they got back to me within 24 hours, and and they were very appreciative of the fact that you're giving them a lot of detail, because I think a lot of the time they get a lot of feedback where people are just saying, hey, it doesn't work. And for a lot of people in product teams, that's very hard for them to sort of to bug track. But if you can give them a lot of detail, then they can fit it into their into their system. So even I've seen with ServiceNow, I was actually impressed with them when I gave them a whole lot of accessibility feedback, and then they actually put it into ServiceNow, as the bug tracking, and were able to give me ticket numbers for all of the ServiceNow tickets for all of these issues, and I could go back and track it a year later, go back and see what happened to that issue, and so I think good vendors are sort of really using that software development methodology. I've had some where I've said to some vendors, look, I just don't have confidence that you say you're doing this, but I don't have any confidence that you are actually doing it. And they go, well, what does confidence look like? I go, well, I should be seeing JIRA tickets, numbers of what you're doing. And they go, oh, we'll send you a spreadsheet from JIRA, and they did in the same day, of all the bugs, and so I think getting to that level of detail, because the talk is, as we know, in the accessibility world, talk is cheap, but if you can provide that detailed feedback and share it, work with vendors, I think they're very appreciative, and it works well.
Yeah, no, exactly right. Andrew, Danny, I'm not sure if he's still on the call, and I did a similar one with the Easy Retro with the team in Brazil, and they made their changes to labels and things like that on their Easy Retro just by doing a quick little video of Andrew navigating the page with his sense of humor as well. So, so it's make it that discussion and that way that you can communicate definitely is quite useful. So How do you think, Angie, I'll start with you because you're part of the OZeWAI subcommittee. How do you think OZeWAI can best support accessibility specialists to promote and understand accessibility for procurement? What kind of things, can we be doing?
Well, I think this is something which I say to the people internally, is that I just openly confess to them that probably when I started at uni about 10 years ago, I didn't know much about how to do accessible procurement, and really neither did anybody else. But now there's just been a lot of work, or everything's changed. Now people know how to do accessible procurement, and it's just a matter of implementing it. And so I think, so there's lots of great examples which are looking at what other people do, because I'm always looking at what people are doing in the US, or look at what Callum's doing in New Zealand, and we all get new ideas from not only different approaches which people are taking. And so I think that thing of because the most convincing argument for people is to take them on a bit of a journey whereby instead of you being an accessibility advocate, I don't see myself as an advocate within the organisation. I see myself as more as a trusted advisor on like the legal office, in which you're providing best practice solutions to people. And when you say to people, look, this is something which is a tough topic, but a lot of people have been looking at it, in the EU, in the US, in other jurisdictions, and everybody's working, it's towards being standards based. Even if you look at the, look at the HTML specification, I think 1990. HTML 1.1 was when they first introduced alt text, I think, into HTML. So it's been around a long time. And so people have been thinking about this for a long time. But I think exposing these best practices from, of what other people are doing, because I suppose a lot of people here who are, the Ricky Onsmans of these people who I see on the call, that they would read all of the or we'll probably read a lot of the blog posts and stuff from other organisations, but a lot of people just don't have the time or don't have exposure to those sources. So the more that we can say, hey, look, here's some great resources, collating that sort of thing, I think people find very useful.
That's great. And Juanita, you the same with the communities in the US? Is that important to how you get the message across around and building those relationships, obviously, with procurement and business communities too?
And I think an organization like OZeWAI could probably actually have specific training for procurement professionals. I think that would be really helpful because, a lot of procurement professionals really are interested in accessibility and really want to be able to do the right thing. And if you could kind of recruit them to our side, it could, it can make a little bit of a difference. Yeah, building those inroads.
No, exactly right. And hopefully some of these resources we're going to share soon will help with that as we step into supporting our members to even build training resources that we can bring into the community. What about you, Callum? What kind of community aspects do you see that's important in New Zealand around, or even globally, in getting your message across about accessible procurement?
In the community, so one of the main things we use to sort of bring together a community to share this kind of information is our fortnightly clinics for the web standards. We get a range of practitioners from the private sector and the public sector in a wide range of different roles, and that's usually where we share these sorts of messages. It's where we advertise the new guidance that we've written, and we also help people implement the guidance as well with practical examples. So yeah, that's probably the main community we have. We've also got like a all of government social media thing through Viva Engage, it's called now. It used to be Yammer. And that's just got a wide range of digital practitioners in it as well. So yeah, those are the main channels we use.
Excellent. All right. And I guess for anyone on the call, if you've got questions for the panelists, just please put them in the chat. Even if we can't answer them now, we can bring them back to you. But yeah, please feel free to put your questions in there that you might have around accessible procurement and maybe even building it into your own organization. So I've got another question here about recommending how an organisation build evidence for an accessibility policy and procurement process. We've talked a little bit about, it's good business sense, all that kind of thing. How do you take it to the business to say that accessibility should be considered earlier in the procurement process? Did you want to go first, Juanita? Because I think you're doing that.
Yeah. So you'll have to make the case a lot of different ways to a lot of different people. And sometimes, it will feel like you're having the same conversation over and over. But that's a good thing, because eventually some of those start sticking. And then, you start learning how to talk to different kinds of stakeholders in a way that's meaningful to them. And so with messaging and such, what really helps is showing the actual number of folks. Obviously you have all these amorphous, disability statistics out there. But if you're able to actually do a little bit of research on the particular people you serve, for instance, veterans, roughly 30% of veterans have disabilities. As an organization that serves a good portion of veterans and their families, it's just going to be a bit impactful to show that around 30% of those folks could have disabilities, also talking about some things in a way that resonates with folks that serve our members, such as folks who have been who have service-connected disabilities and such. So just figure out the messaging that really works for your organization. There's the different business cases out there, but I don't let those be your only cases. There's also some people really it doesn't really sink in unless you start talking about the fact that they themselves might one day, if they don't already have a disability, it's more than likely that they will have a disability at some point. 1 in 2 people over the age of 75 have a disability. And I don't think people realize that, as they get older, the likelihood of them having a disability increases. And some people who already have disabilities, a lot of them don't necessarily realize that they also are part of the disability community. They've never identified that way. And so you start talking about things that are disabilities, things like ADHD, anxiety, depression. These are things that cognitive disabilities can actually affect 1/5 of the population just on their own. And so it's likely that you're, also talking to somebody who they themselves have a disability, but might not see themselves that way. So, it's really just figuring out what motivates people and kind of speaking to that. And it's going to be different for every single person and every stakeholder that you speak to. And once you find that, that message that kind of works for them, tell them how they can make a difference and tell them exactly what you need. Have a plan. That's the important part. Never go into, accessibility advocacy or growing your own accessibility program without a plan for the next step.
Yeah, exactly right. And Andrew, I know we've talked about in the subcommittee like a risk approach as well. Did you want to share a little bit about that when you're trying to give evidence to your business areas?
Yeah, I think, well, I agree with Juanita. It's great to have stats which relate to your organisation. So I think sometimes people, do come up with these ones which they pluck from other places, but I try and get stats in relation to, well, I'm at a university, but then to say, look, 10% of our students are registered with disability support. Like, that's a lot of people. We're not talking about a fictitious group here at all, and I think once you sort of get over that hurdle of showing them the stats and showing them that it's a group that's actually on the increase, for a variety of reasons, people start to go, okay, that's something which I need to look at. But also through the lens of risk management, I find that that's a really good way of presenting it, because it's the sort of language that everybody can understand. Everybody from you know, the IT people really understand, you know, they just go, no, now you're talking my language, I'm familiar with all these terms, you know, and then you can just show, oh, okay, this is how accessibility relates to that. Or if you're talking to the legal office, you know, I could, you know, we're buying a new legal management system, and you should see how bad those legal management systems are, by the way. They're shocking. Like it's an irony that all of these law firms are saying, yeah, we act for the poor old, you know, poor old people, you know, but the
systems
vendors
they
have
use, yeah.
clearly never been asked the question before, you know,
Yeah.
by any other law firm. But yeah, but having that lens of risk really, you know, rings true. But I think as to what Juanita was getting to there is you've got to sort of have multiple ways of sort of selling the story, and then pick the way that's going to resonate well with that particular group, you know. So but for me, a lot of the ones which I like to do is just having the evidence from users, because if, like, I can write a 50-page report and people's eyes just glaze over and it just goes into the bin, but I show them a 3-minute video of a student struggling to do something, and people are like, we need to fix this today. You know, yeah, I've had in meetings, I've shown somebody a video and they've walked out, can we go and have a look at that kiosk together now? You know, the person who's in charge of that area, can we go and have a look at it together? I want to see, you know, because that was really bad.
It shows really too that, you know, if they really do think about that, do not want to exclude people, right? I guess that's the question to ask. You know, do you really want to exclude people? And they go, whoa, you know, you're putting that back against me, rather than, you know. So what about you, Callum? What do you see as the best evidence at the moment? And obviously you've got a few ideas of that with risk and everything in your guide as well.
Yeah, frankly, I think I just agree with everything that's been said so far. That the arguments that you have to use depend on the audience that you are dealing with, and you have to use different arguments for different people. I've seen some people in government, they respond really well to you simply tell them this is a mandatory requirement and it's part of your job, and you must do it to do your job properly, and then they just get it done. For other people, that doesn't work, and they need a more an empathy-based moral argument where they you know, they see examples of disabled people not being able to achieve certain tasks. It really depends. Different things work for different people and different audiences.
That's great.
As for what works the best, I don't know. just
No.
try one. If it doesn't work, try the next one.
No, exactly. So look, we're coming up to halfway through. If you do want to take a break, do a stretch or whatever, we're going to keep going with the discussions. I'm actually going to ask about your go-to resources for accessible ICT procurement as specialists. And I'm actually going to, once we finish this kind of quick discussion, I'm going to share in the chat a new resource that OZeWAI has been working on, and we'll discuss that as well. Juanita, did you want to go first with what your go-to resources are? And feel free to put links in the chat if you can as well.
Yeah. Here, let me see if I actually have links to these. I really do. The Disability In toolkit is amazing, and if you haven't checked it out, it is, you know, if you're looking for just different kinds of template documents and such, it is just very, very comprehensive. There's just a lot to it. Also, you know, asking other people in the industry, I find is very helpful for how they approach things. There's a wealth of knowledge there. And obviously, if you haven't joined the Web Alley Slack yet, I highly recommend that you do. I'm just going to put the link in there. It's a not so secret, but kind of secret club of all the people in the accessibility industry. And so really great resource to kind of meet other folks that are facing the same problems, share tips and such, and actually meet a lot of the vendors that you'll probably be working with, accessibility teams, because they're all on there. You know, going to conferences is also a great way to meet folks as well. But, you know, there's also just, you know, I have a talk that I gave over at Perth Web Accessibility Conference and also CSUN. I can provide that link as well. That has a
Yes,
lot of
please.
useful tips too.
Yep, excellent. How about you, Andrew? What kind of your go-to resources? Obviously, we've talked about the Court, which is earlier on, and that's in the chat, so we'll put them in the.
I actually look a lot at US universities. I think they lead the way in terms of not only the procurement process, because I think a lot of US universities have been sued because the Department of Justice there takes a more active role in some of these claims than in Australia, and so a lot of people have a procurement process, and universities always make stuff publicly available. And so that's really good. And so and also too, they have in place systems for sort of a plan B, so for alternate access plans, because they're quite practical in that regard. They've got students who are coming onto campus, and they know that not everything's going to be fixed, but they still need to be able to accommodate people. And so how are they going to do that? And so they have a lot of good templates in relation to that. I think the EduCause mailing list has a accessibility mailing list. So I'll read that one. The IAAP has a mailing list. That's a good one as well. And so you can get some of that stuff being sent to you. But yeah, so they're probably the main ones that I have a look at.
Cool. And what about you, Callum? Besides your New Zealand resource, is there anything else that you jump into?
There's no reason to look at anything else. Our resource is the best. No, I'm kidding. So yeah, I mean, every now and again, the guidance we write doesn't fulfill all the needs and questions that agencies come to us with. I just have a Google, frankly.
Yeah.
It's a good skill to have. And I do really want to reaffirm that web accessibility Slack that was raised before.
Yeah.
Seriously good. That's where all of my most difficult questions go when I can't answer something. So definitely join that.
That's excellent. Yeah. All right, so I'm putting a link in the chat to our new OZeWAI product accessibility list, the OZeWAI PAL. We've been working in the accessible ICT procurement with a subcommittee for the last 2 years. We did a whole lot of empathy mapping workshops. We talked to a lot of people about what are the gaps in understanding accessible procurement. This is a beta. We've still got a lot of testing to do. But what it is basically using some knowledge from the community already. Thank you, Andrew Norman, in understanding an ACR, and then providing a score for it. So we've got an about page, and then it links off to a beta, which has about 50 or 60 products that we have scored based on their public information on how accessible they are. We need some more information about, there's a lot of work to be done yet. About what their roadmaps are, all that kind of thing. And also, this is the kind of thing that we would say that you would use at this before you even start a procurement process. But Andrew, tell us a little bit about this kind of this PAL tool that we've got now. What do you think, and how would you use it?
Yeah, look, I think we started off using this. I started off maintaining a bit of a spreadsheet because I just wanted to compare applications which we had in place in the university. And sometimes you get, we all know that people sometimes come to you very late in the day and they're sort of going, oh, we're looking at a new product. Can you do a bit of an accessibility audit? And so sometimes it's good to be able to provide that really quick bit of feedback just on the publicly available documentation, just to give them a bit of a feel for where that product is and whether they, so taking that, probably all of us, when somebody says, oh, I'm looking at a product, they give us the product name. First thing we do is we search to see whether that they have an ACR. And then, but based on that, I can maybe take that, plug it into a spreadsheet with other products which we have, and then be able to give people a bit of an idea really quickly as to where that sort of fits within other applications which we have. So internally we would use it to say, okay, how does it compare to the Microsoft products? Or, because people sort of, to products that they know that they're using, so that can be quite powerful when people are doing it all the time. And I think now we see that people like Microsoft now have ACRs in relation to all of their products. And so, like, I think they've got 1,600. I'm going to pop that in the chat. Accessibility conformance report. So given that a lot of organizations use a lot of Microsoft products, you've probably got a bit of a head start straight away to, coming up with a bit of a list. But it doesn't replace all of the rest of your procurement process, of course, but it can be a very quick way of just getting some information quickly.
Yeah, what we've done is we've tried to put some links to if there's already an accessibility statement, if there's already an ACR. And then I think the idea is that we will have some more details. We actually have been documenting whether they have a roadmap or support emails and things like that. Tell us a little bit about the scoring mechanism here, Andrew. Can you share a little bit about this approach?
With the scoring, now this is a bit of a interesting one, because basically some people, when they look at a ACR, they'll maybe weight it, and so some people who do this quite a bit, they might typically around keyboard, for example, I go, well, if it doesn't work with a keyboard, then it's, then that's probably higher than other things. But basically what I've done with this is to try and not apply any of that weighting. People are still free to do that if they want to, but really just keeping it to the WCAG, because WCAG already has its levels in there. And so if I dream up a new set of levels, then that might work for me, but it doesn't work for Callum, and it doesn't work for, for somebody else. And so it's just strictly counting up the total number of WCAG, failures, and then just saying, well, as a percentage, if you've got WCAG 2.1, 50 checkpoints, and you just take it off so that would be 100%. And so you just take off the number of ones where they don't comply. And then I'll just roughly put it into a thing of, you could say that if something has sort of less than six or seven, accessibility issues, then it's probably low risk, and then, so that you can just get a bit of a gradated thing. Because when we look at an an ACR, when you've got just like a sea of failures there, it's pretty obvious that this is a really risky product, So that's the idea. If just using publicly available information, so you're not really doing your personal interpretation on it. You're just saying this is based on the vendor's own documentation. This is where they're at.
Yeah, and we do want to make it clear that this is to use at the start. You don't use it as your assessment. There's so much more detail that is still there. And as we say, it depends on how someone's filled in ACR. Something that does run surveys, the initial system could be quite accessible, but as soon as you start putting content in it, it won't be. So, there's totally those steps that need to happen. Also, that it's designed for offer an initial, not really comparison, maybe validation of what they've got in place, and you want to ask some other things. And also that we are doing this as volunteers, and we'd love people to be involved in this as well. So get in touch with OZeWAI to see how you can help us build this product list up and build out the actual PAL itself. Because those ACRs go out of date pretty quickly as new ones come out. The other aspect too about some feedback for it, you can send us a product. So if you're working somewhere and you don't need to know how to score it, we'll do the scoring. Send us a product that you'd like to know, and we'll put it up on the list. You can use the forum, the OZeWAI forum here, and I hope you can all see my screen with the product details up there. Is that correct? Yeah. So we do have an OZeWAI forum. It's been a bit quiet, so maybe we can get that going again with some questions about products and scoring and how we're going about this, or even just about the project itself. We'd also like vendors to get in touch. You can go to the OZeWAI consultant directory to find someone to help you with your product. and also send a product if you do an update to your ACR. We would love to get any updates on your roadmaps or support or anything like that. And we are working on sharing a wider spreadsheet of all that information as well, and that roadmap. And yeah, just send us products, and we'll start doing some more collating and scoring. So Juanita, you've seen this now. We've shared a few kind of steps of this with you and Alpha as well. How do you see using this in your organization? How would you like other people to use it?
I think, definitely as a just it does take a while to find the actual conformance report that relates to a particular product. So that does save you some time right there. And then what I would do is I would actually take a look at the conformance report in the description section yourself and see who did the audit. Like for Microsoft, for example, they have a lot of conformance reports, but they're generated by folks who are DHS trusted testers, which is a good entry level certification. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they've had a lot of the most experienced people testing all of their products, which is true for many organizations. And then so you can kind of take a look at that and kind of weigh the ACR of the organization, and then kind of add that to your risk score. And there was a good question in the chat about what does risk scoring mean. It's whatever factors your organization thinks is important. So, and the risk is the risk of them giving you an inaccessible product, or a product that is going to be inaccessible to your customers or your employees, however you define the scope of your program. And that the risk of those folks encountering an issue and also creating legal liability for your organization. There are different kinds of risks that you're going to probably want to score, and you'll want to assess your monitoring plan. Your procurement plan should come with a monitoring plan and a monitoring component to it. And your risk will help you determine how often you actually look back at those vendors to after they've become compliant according to your own and to industry standards and to your own standards internally. How often do you come back and look at them to make sure that they're still continuing on that right track and still doing the right thing? So that's a lot of words to say. It's a good starting point.
No, exactly right. And thanks, Andrew, for putting in the Powell engine. I will probably put that at the top of. We'll try and put that at the top of this this page as well, instead of hidden into the actual spreadsheet. So I'll put that up at the top as well. And we want any feedback on this. How can you use it? What's missing? Tell us what products. Is this useful? What other categories do we need? All of this in the feedback form, and on the forum as well, if you'd like to. So there's a couple of ways that you can contact us. What about you, Callum? How do you think this could be useful for some of the people that you work with?
Yeah, so I think in the government context, when we do procurement, we often have to weight various factors of each product, and that ends up turning into a single number, a score. So I think that that Powell risk rating offers an interesting methodology for condensing the level of WCAG failure down to a single number or a single metric that can then be used within procurement processes to prioritize the products that have less WCAG failures. I've used a few different ways of measuring that before. One was simply to ask each vendor to provide an automated test of the homepage on multiple different products, and we use that to kind of compare. But yeah, I think it's a very interesting methodology. One of the annoying things with a VPAT, for instance, is they're so complicated, and it's hard to just get a general vibe sometimes. So simply counting the WCAG failures seems like a good method.
Yeah, and I think too that idea of it's just a first check. Like, it's not going to be the final. You still need to do other testing. What else would you do, Juanita, to do that kind of confirmation of before you even go to the tender product? Would you do some other testing as well?
So generally, before a contract is signed, essentially, you're going to have to plan for the fact that 96% of the internet is inaccessible, and it's unlikely that you'll get a vendor that's completely accessible right from the start. So you're going to have to pick the most accessible out of the options that you have. So doing things like doing some smoke testing to get a good baseline, reviewing conformance reports, doing research on the vendor are all very important things. Also speaking to the vendor and getting in touch with their accessibility teams to kind of make those connections and see who would be most willing to fix things. And when you get to the contracting stage, you'll want to write in your contracts that they'll commission audits and then they'll provide you with their reports on a periodic basis, so that you're kind of shifting some of those costs, because the program is more sustainable if you can shift some of those costs over to the group that's supposed to be conducting those audits and supposed to be meeting those accessibility requirements. They have to show you that proof if you write it into that contract. And work and break those contract provisions well, and then do your own testing. It might be full audits if you don't get quite the contract provision you would like. So you might commission those audits or do them yourselves. And it might be periodic smoke testing to verify that, well, yes, you're doing all the right things in terms of, getting, a person, somebody to actually perform the accessibility testing and such. But you can't just take folks' word for it. So if you don't have a letter from an independent auditor saying that all findings from any audit have been fixed, and the date and who performed the audit and information like that, and you don't receive that on a regular basis, once a year, once every 2 years, depending on how frequent you actually create your monitoring program based on the risk assessment you do internally, you'll want to also include smoke testing, periodic smoke testing as part of that. It's also a best practice if it's unlikely that you're going to get or have a need for full audits on an annual cadence, for instance. So it's going to be tailored to the vendor that you're working with, to how many folks use that platform or service, and also the audience and other things that kind of help you weigh internally where's the best way to spend your resources and what would provide the most value.
Yeah, no, exactly right. Look, this is great. It's been just a wonderful session so far, a lot of discussions. If you've got any other questions, please put them in the chat for those that have joined us. Happy to answer those. We've got another 25 minutes to go. I'm going to jump into something that we were discussing before we even started recording. Andrew, you mentioned ChatGPT. Is there a way that we can use that to help us with our procurement process?
Well, that's an interesting one.
Well,
I was
AI
just
somehow.
I was mentioning before we got started that I was evaluating some RFP responses this morning, and one of the vendors had clearly used GTP, whatever, to come up with their response, because in the first answer to what are you doing in relation to accessibility, they were doing everything under the sun in relation to it, this long-winded thing. And the second question was, do you have an ACR? Was, no, we don't have anything. And I thought, well, how is it possible, that
you're doing everything, but you don't have anything? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it does have a role. Like, I think some people say, well, with AI in particular, so, some of these plugins are quite useful for, say, for alt text on images, so as part of that sort of A tag, prompting people to put in alt text. I see Microsoft do that now, and a few other products of sort of saying, prompting people to put in alt text. Here's some suggested alt text, and people can improve upon that. I think for training, I made up a little game for people whereby they have a image, to test their web page against the AI to see who writes better alt text, them or the AI. And and you can score it, you know, who wins, you know, and then you have a trophy at the end or something like that. But also too, I think that some of these, I think it definitely has a role for, especially in the area of cognitive disability, which is an area in which we still just are not good at dealing with, but helping people who really want to have organisation tools, people who struggle with the volume of receiving, you know, emails or not being able to filter emails. I know I do a bit of work with students who have ADHD and are on the autism spectrum, and a lot of the time I'll ask those kids, you know, like, what do you do for file management? And they'll just say, oh, I just save it. It's just in everything's in documents, you know, there's not one folder on their drive. And so that thing of being able to organize things, pluck something out as being having this is a calendar, I can sync it with your calendar, you know, I see you have a date, you know, etc. So I think there's some good potential there, but also too, we're going to see some really bad examples as well.
Keep an eye out for the bad responses that have been generated, but at least, you know, we can put them into some of our examples. Maybe, you know, if they say this, and then they say no to an ACR, then you'll know. So, as examples and ideas for training as well. What about you, Juanita? How do you see any of this kind of AI ChatGPT helping in the procurement process, or not?
I think it's going to. Well, I'm a bit of a tech optimist. You know, I for one welcome our robot overlords, but you know, that's not me, that's the Simpsons. But I mean, I really feel hopeful that folks non-lawyers and such will be able to create better contract provisions, that procurement teams, which don't, some folks are lawyers in procurement teams, but a lot of them aren't, and they're having to do legal work. And I think ChatGPT will be a better equalizer to kind of help them create better contracts. And also it will help companies that understand what other folks will be looking for in an RFP response and be able to better prepare themselves for a monitoring regime of, you know, a company that provides their services and such. I just think it will create a lot of efficiencies, but also kind of bring awareness to the facets of the procurement process that and prepare folks to be, be better prepared for a future where accessibility is more paramount in that process.
Yeah, exactly. What about you, Callum? Have you seen anything yet, or see any kind of advantages, disadvantages?
I think the biggest impact AI will have in the procurement of web content will happen earlier than the procurement itself. It'll be the fact that AI is making up an increasing proportion of the code that is written, and that code will increase in quality. So what will really matter in the future is, what model did you use to write the code for this?
Yeah.
Right. There'll be models that are better at applying WCAG to the way it writes its code. Does it understand how to use ARIA correctly? Does it understand semantic HTML? And that will become a really big factor in the software development process. I think we'll eventually shift away from training developers on how to write accessible code, and we'll be instead training models, AI models, on how to write accessible code. And that will be the biggest factor. And I think it's also going to eventually lead to a pretty substantial shift in the way assistive technologies function, where perhaps instead of analyzing the code on a web page and the semantic structure of the through the accessibility API, there might be a bigger and bigger role for visual analysis of web pages, understanding their structure through artificial intelligence. And I think that will bridge a lot of the problems that we see.
That's great. Okay. And I guess just kind of, we got down to another 20 minutes. I'm just going to go into a little bit about the biggest challenges that you see in this procurement space. You know, we've seen some changes. Are there still some challenges? What are the gaps in that you see that are still happening for accessible ICT procurement? Do you want to go first, Juanita?
I mean, I think a huge gap is that most large organizations out there, and I'm taking liberties here by saying most, but I don't doubt it's probably a good number of them, don't actually know who all their vendors are. And that's probably one of the first things you have to do when you start a monitoring program is get that inventory. And then also actually having a procurement team that adheres to a procurement process where there are flags built in to loop in accessibility folks. And really that's just takes a lot of education. That takes getting embedded into the procurement teams is tooling and such, and really helping them understand that you can become a partner, a procurement partner, that not all subject areas live within that procurement team, that they can seek outside help for certain things outside of the procurement team.
Yeah.
So that, and then also getting flags for renewals. That's another big part of the process that kind of gets left, where accessibility folks get left out, which is really critical, especially with old vendors that you've been working with for a long time.
That's great. Thank you. What about you, Andrew? What do you see as the biggest challenge or a gap still that we need to be kind of being aware of?
I think that very quickly we're going to get to the point whereby we're collecting all of this information during the procurement process, and we're doing it now, in which we're asking the vendors all these questions. We're doing some audits ourselves, so we're uncovering a lot of the problems with the product, and it might be the product that you end up going with. But then is to say, well, what are you doing with all of that information at the end of the procurement process and when the product is going live? So that thing of saying, okay, we've got the product, we know it has some problems. What are we going to do to address those? So what's the plan B, for what's the alternative for those people, and really having that as part of the planning process. And it can be difficult for IT people, because I think a lot of the time in IT, when you're engaged to provide a service, an IT service, but when the service won't do what you want it to do, then it requires extra work on the part of the organization. You're just getting started, so
Yeah.
but that thing of engaging with other people across the organization. And so one of the things which we've done at the university is, so we have an IT area in which I'm part of that IT department, but then we have a student and scholarly services which do all of the student facing, running the libraries, running all of that sort of stuff. But now they've invited me to be on their disability and inclusion panel, so that we can try and get this link coming across,
Yeah.
a bit better. So just to say to people, well, what would you do if somebody couldn't use the system? And a lot of the people who are using the system probably have a pretty good solution to that.
Yeah.
They would be able
They're
to
going to work
say,
around.
yeah, so say with two-factor authentication is my favorite, because very hard to get right. A lot of the time, enrolling in two-factor authentication is really difficult. You're asked to scan a QR code or something that you can't do if you can't see the screen. But sometimes there's a very practical answer, which is to, like let's say at a university, actually you can walk into the ground floor of the library and they've got IT help and they can fix it for you in 10 minutes, But are you made aware of the fact that that's a workaround, for it, and that it's been publicised? And so I think with procurement, I think we're well down the track of starting to get on top of asking all these questions, collating all this information, but then this next step of what do we actually do with that, and the residual risk, if you like, how are we dealing with that?
I think there's also, if you are bringing something in you think is just an off-the-shelf product, but you do a lot of customization to it, right? You need to be tracking what's happening with that and how that's been made, tested for accessibility through that process. So that combination of procuring and then building at the same time, and how do you build that in together? Totally agree. That's an important one. What about you, Callum? What do you see as that one of the biggest challenges and the gaps in procurement?
It's a little bit sad, but I think one of the biggest gaps in the New Zealand government context is agencies simply are not asking for accessibility evidence to start with. And in the cases where they do ask for it, it is asked, it is generally procurement practitioners that do not know how to interpret that evidence that are dealing with it. So great, you've got a VPAT, but then no one in that procurement understands it. There's a massive shortage of accessibility practitioners in New Zealand. So we can't really have accessibility experts checking over every procurement of every piece of web content. So yeah, just a bunch of problems. Don't know what the solution is. Try and do
Well,
better.
hopefully this list will help as well. So maybe some procurement people put in a product that they're looking at, or someone's come to them about in the business, and we can score them for them and give them that first understanding of what's there. I totally agree. I think as we ask more of those questions, as we expect our vendors to be more accessible, we're going to find that we're going to need some pretty good understanding from our accessibility specialists that they know how to provide that advice as well. So, consistent and quality, understanding of procurement. It comes back to that training, I guess, as well for accessibility specialists on what happens earlier. Either with user research, discovery, design, and through the procurement steps. So you're not just doing that accessibility audit at the end. You're not just a tester anymore. You're involved in a whole lot along the way, or you use different, skill sets, as you say, Juanita. How many different? You've got some role descriptions, Juanita, that you're working on in your organisation. How many different types of accessibility roles do you have there?
So I have 6 job descriptions drafted, plus an additional one. But they, we haven't necessarily put them through yet. But yeah, those are all seeking different kinds of skill sets. So folks who work in training or content management or content generation, they're going to need a different skill set than somebody who's working with developer teams, and that's going to be a different skill set than somebody who's doing vendor management or somebody who's doing UX research or design. So really, we've gotten to the point, I think, as an industry where we need to start making room for different kinds of accessibility talent and not putting folks, not having folks have this one skill set that covers everything. Accessibility leadership is a different skill set as well. So it's, really segmenting those and really understanding, what the full breadth of accessibility talent should be and where we should be directing folks to go and how we should be directing them to learn. Because you're never going to find it's going to be very difficult if the industry is just requiring everybody to know everything about everything.
Exactly right. And I'm not sure if you've seen, but we'll put it out in our next newsletter as well, and a link in the chat at the end. We're doing some research with the Future Skills Organisation on that digital accessibility gap in Australia. We actually identify that as well, Callum, in Australia, and especially if people are going to be looking for quality accessibility experts in a variety of different areas, where are they going to find them if they're not coming up through the ranks of education as well? So we're building up a bit of research around that. We'd love case studies from people. So reach out to OZeWAI if you want to develop a case study. There's some information on our website about that. And there's also, even if you don't want to do the case study, there's a survey of what it's like with the accessibility space in your organisation that will help us as well with evidence for this future skill organisation. And they'll take that to the Australian government to say that, hey, things need to change in their workforce planning. So please help us out with that. Andrew put a comment or a question in there. What about the use of AI to improve our content writing? We've talked about that. That's a different skill set. Again, I take it probably not so ChatGPT for the responses that came through, Andrew, but what about other content writing?
Yeah, I think definitely has a role for I think particularly if you start to have AI trained on certain types of data, so at the moment I think it's just sort of one size fits all a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, but I imagine over time So, for example, this isn't directly related to what Andrew's saying, but say for captions for auto captioning of videos, for example. And so some of the AI stuff now, you can maybe load in a vocabulary list which is relevant to that. So particularly if you say if you've got in the medical disciplines, they have a lot of the terminology is very discipline specific, but you can maybe load into the language model, hey, here's a glossary of terms or that we're using in this course, so that you can then get a higher accuracy on auto-generated captions, for example. And so I think as we start to get more nuanced language models and training data on, which is more specific to industries, then I think it'll become inevitably a lot more useful.
That's great. What about you, Juanita? You seen that anything in the content space there?
Oh yeah, gosh. Already it can do quite good things. A Copilot for 365 is very good. I worked for years as a writer. And ChatGPT, if you give it the right prompts, can do a fairly decent job. I mean, still writers can do better, but for general things, not a lot better. It's interesting. And as we do get more specialized models, as Andrew was saying, and also I agree with a lot what Callum was saying with the development side of it as well, I think it will be just a really important tool in the future. And folks can already use it to kind of create more punchy content. It does use language in a way that, a lot of people have their own specific style. And I think tools like AI tools and such can help people write in ways that they wouldn't normally write. And that's very helpful too, to get through things like writer's block and such. So it's going to be a very great content creation tool. It should be used ethically, of course, but I really do. I'm very optimistic about the future of it being and how it will be for productivity.
That's great. Hey, we're down to our last few minutes. I'm just going to go out to the participants on the call today. Is there anyone that would like to ask a question to the group, or maybe even have a comment to say? I know Ricky's on the call and has done some work on AI. Maybe there's something you'd like to touch on as well. So please, just put your hand up or and unmute or put your video on, and if you've got a question or a comment. No. Okay. Well, we might just finish off. What do you see the opportunities then for procurement then? What's our future look like? Juanita, what do you think? Accessible procurement going to become easier?
I think so. I think there eventually may one day be this information will be more publicly available because it'll be published by vendors, but I think also folks seeking accessible products may start publishing reviews of vendors, for instance. This information about the accessibility status, customers will probably do that as well. I just see a world where folks aren't going to be able to sort of it's not going to be hard to find the accessibility status of a vendor. And because of that, I think vendors are starting to prepare for that future. And I think it's just going to become more and more common to see them have accessibility teams to really see how they can bake it into their development processes and such. So it's a good thing. That market pressures is really a good thing. It's only going to get, I think, better from here.
Yeah, I think so. And I think with that idea that if the vendors and those products are starting to build their accessibility teams, again, we're going to need some good quality accessibility specialists out there to help support that. So please, I'll put the link to the skills gap research. Please give us some feedback to give us that evidence to get into the education space here in Australia. What about you, Andrew? What do you see as one of the opportunities for what's happening in the procurement space now?
I think some people well, there's different levels of maturity for people in terms of when they're producing products. And I see this at the university level, because we say in learning and teaching, we've got people who they need no convincing in relation to all of this. There's a lot, and they have a lot of expertise. We have a learning designer accessibility. They're in charge of just doing learning design for teaching people how to do accessible learning design. And so, but I see the difference in their approach to procurement than to other people. And so, so that they would say in their procurement, people always put accessibility under non-functional requirements. I never understand why, but in they're buying a learning management system, they go, no, this is a functional requirement. This is absolutely key, and so, but then there's other areas around the uni that might say, oh, but because we're doing it for everything. So if you've got, say, contractor management, when you've got somebody who comes onto site and they're an electrician, and do they have the right, accreditation to be on site to do something? And then the people say to me, oh yeah, but how many blind electricians are coming on and climbing up on the roof? I'll go, well, how many people have of those people dropped out of school because they've had a disability, or they're trying to read their answer your questions on a mobile phone out on the building site. It is relevant to them, and then they sort of go, oh, okay. So but I think there's still that, so I think there's maybe a growing divide, because you see some organisations are starting to do this really impressively, and then some people who are just still at 0 point.
So they're the ones we want to reach out to and kind of say, come and work with us. Let's get better. It's going to be a competitive edge, all that kind of thing. I think one of the largest areas, I think, or the most important areas for us to consider is recruitment. So if you've got recruitment products that you use, please put those in that product form, because we would like to score those. I think that's probably one of the biggest barriers that people want to start in an organisation. They're using a lot of recruitment tools now. And that could be even the first barrier for getting a job, for getting people with lived experience into your workplace. So share whatever product you're using, and we'll start doing the scoring. What about you, Callum? What do you see the opportunities though, and the future for accessible procurement?
In the New Zealand context, the biggest opportunity would be the potential for accessibility legislation that's currently being worked on. Could make the requirements for accessibility evidence far more strict, particularly when public money is involved. That will create an increase in demand for accessibility evidence and conformance, and then the market will respond, because they won't be able to get public funding for things without that evidence and without showing high levels of conformance. The other thing is we are working towards, it's very early stages, we're working towards implementing EN 301549 in New Zealand to potentially expand to the accessibility requirements to all forms of ICT, not just the web, and also increasing the number of government agencies that are mandated to meet those standards. So those are sort of the biggest opportunities in the future, at least for New Zealand.
That's great. And I think, where my understanding is that you're talking to a lot of people in our federal and state government as well about the things that are happening. There's a lot of learnings that are being shared. At the federal level, there's the Digital Accessibility Toolkit that's being developed and standards in that space at the federal level. A lot of wonderful procurement advice being shared in state levels as well in Australia. And we'll be sharing a lot of that on our resource page as well. So keep an eye out for those. And support those. If you can put a link to those and share them with each other. But we will be starting a little bit more of a full resource list, including obviously with disability and seeing how we can work with them further. Look, thank you everyone. We've come up to 1:30. It's been a wonderful session, lots to cover. Very excited that we've promoted our OZeWAI PAL for the first time. Very nerve-wracking as well, but we want to work with our the vendors and the products out there and help them to become more accessible. Help us to do that. Be a part of the project if you can, or volunteer some time to maybe do some scoring and learn how do we do it, and learn about ACRs and BPATs at the same time. Thank you so much. I'm going to just thank everyone here if you'd like to say some final words. Andrew, would you like to go first?
Yeah, just always very inspiring to come along and speak to these things too, and also to flick through the. I'm always super impressed by the number of people who come along to these things who actually could be giving these exact same presentations themselves. So I think that the number of people who we have on the call who are experts in this area, and it's all very inspiring. Just to see the number of people who are soldiering ahead with this, and I think there's some great opportunities, and especially in that procurement space. One final tip which I would have for people is, one thing which we've done at the uni is we have a regular catch up with the procurement team. So I think it's not every month, but it's like every 6 weeks, and so we get together and just discuss about accessible procurement and procurement in general and quality assurance, and that's been a really good process to just sort of get together every so often, have a formal meeting just to talk through some of these issues a little bit more at length, rather than just spending all your time in the documentation.
No, that's great. It's great to have you, Andrew, and all your work you've done for the subcommittee too. Thank you so much. And there's a few on the call as well. Thanks everyone to the OZeWAI subcommittee procurement who have been influential in helping us support, putting roadmaps of their own organisations' information in there to help us to get to, what is the problem we're trying to solve here. And in this case, we just wanted to try and bring a whole lot of information together for people to find easily. Hopefully we'll do that, and we can continue to do that. Jaunita, would you have some final words as well?
Yeah, just know you're not alone. There's a whole huge space out there of people around the world who are asking the exact same questions you are. And feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm on the accessibility Slack, but you can find me on LinkedIn. Happy to answer any questions. And I think the coolest thing I think about this space that we work in is just how willing everybody is to sort of help each other out, and because we're all in it for the same thing. We want to see an internet that's accessible. We want folks to be able to access all the great things that are out there on the web.
Yep. And you, Callum, some final words? Thanks, Jaunita.
I was recently meeting with a disabled people's organisation, and something they said to me was, ensure no public funds are spent on creating barriers for disabled people. And that's just been echoing around my brain ever since. And it really makes me feel how important it is to make sure that we're not investing, tax money into making disabled people's lives worse. Should be avoided at all costs, I would say.
No, that's great. And for OZeWAI as well, consider joining, support us. We do run these projects. We'd like to be able to set it up so that we've got our student members that we can actually maybe pay them to do some of this project work as well. We send people to go to different events to talk about OZeWAI and accessibility. Support us as much as you can. Subscribe to the mailing list and join OZeWAI. We're coming up to our renewals in July as well, so keep an eye out for those messages for those members already. And thank you also to the OZeWAI committee and the members already. We really, and the subcommittees particularly, your support and your volunteer time has been so valuable. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.